perched here a bit because my dog has squeezed himself right next to me. It is Sunday, the 9th of January 2022, and I have been reading for the last couple of weeks or so out of the book I started to write in 2006 and wrote sporadically on and off. It's a story about a reincarnation, and it's about the death of Bliss, with which the story starts. She died after her 95th birthday. I am now at chapter 103, and I continue. My dog is snoring. I hope you can't hear it. Holly and Chris. Holly being the daughter of Bliss and Chris, her husband. Holly had spent the morning writing, sitting at her desk, sunshine streaming into the room. Shading the screen ever so often, she was looking out into the garden. The sun was warming her face, and although she could feel a cool breeze through the open top window, it felt like a promise of spring. January was over, and she had settled back into her routine of work and writing. She felt incredibly happy, hearing a sniffle behind her in a basket. In the corner of her office was Frida, a beautiful poodle cocker spaniel mix puppy. Not quite a cockapoodle, as Mum was already a mix of spaniel and Jack Russells, but she was adorable, and Holly was so pleased that she had been asked by one of her clients if she wanted a puppy. She had talked to Chris about getting a rescue dog for ages. He had not been that keen, but when she came home last night with little 16-week-old Frida, he could not resist her either. Fast asleep, curled up in the sunshine, this little creature had already changed her life, as she had been out with her before 7 this morning. She had wanted an empty beach, as Frida was still getting used to being outside. But she had totally loved chasing the waves and was exhausted when they came back. She was already trained to do her business outside and was such an affectionate little bundle of joy that Holly wondered why it had taken her so long to finally get a dog. Frida did not really count as a rescue, but having a puppy was such a pleasure. Once they are house-trained, and it seemed Frida was clever, and she had been barking, not a proper bark yet, at the door this morning, which had her out of the bed in no time. Chris had had a lie-in and gone to buy his paper. He said he was looking forward to taking Frida along once she was a little bit older, and she could just imagine him. She hoped he would love him soon. He would love the doggy soon. He had never had any animals as a child and only liked well-trained dogs. They'd had various heated discussions about pets, and for Holly, they were part of the family. They had had cats when Tony was growing up, and he had got used to them. Cats are self-sufficient, and although she had never had her own dog before, she had already noticed how much more attention Frida needed. It had been quite a few years that their last cat died, and she had been so busy. This new year was a new chapter for Holly. She had given up her work in London and had reduced her workload. She felt she needed more time for herself. With Chris having retired, she realized that she spent a lot of time working, and although she was not 65 yet, they were financially not bad off, and she was glad that she had more time to write now. And Walk, our new little member of the family, she thought. Her book was going well. She felt in the flow, and the last 2 hours had passed without her noticing. When she heard the door, she got up. It cannot be long before Susan and David were to arrive. Chris came into her office, and Frida woke up, wagging her tail and walking towards Chris. "Hello, Frida." Chris picked her up, and she looked up at him, licking his chin. To Holly's surprise, he did not stop Frida and looked at her, smiling. "I think little Frida is just what we needed." He was playing with Frida's floppy ears, and Holly felt happy. She got up to embrace both of them. "I think you're right, my darling. She will fit in nicely." Frida, with her brown fur and big brown eyes, looked up at both of them, and to Holly it felt as if she was smiling. "I got some ale for David and for me, and a bottle of sparkling wine. Hope that's okay. We still have a lot of red in the rack, and I don't know what you planned food-wise." "No, that's perfect, Chris. I said to Susan, we decide when they're here. We have pizza in the freezer. We can top it up with stuff and salad. I'm really looking forward to seeing David again. And Tony messaged me. They're all at BLISS place. Faye and Ben and Melanie. He said, why not get together tomorrow? He said we should all go there. That sounds great, don't you think? Holly was smiling at Chris and he took her in his arms. Sometimes he almost forgot how much he loved her, though through all their years together they had grown closer and they'd had quite a few changes in recent years. He was no longer working but was busy helping in the refuge. Holly had just reduced her work hours and they had not yet caught up with the fact that they could spend much more time together. You know, I love you, don't you? You know I love you, don't you, Holly? My brown-eyed beauty. Yes, darling, I know. Seeing Susan and David made me realize that we have become an old couple somewhere along the way. But I know we're fine. I think we need to be giving each other a bit more attention. I feel ever since my mum died, my life seemed to have taken different tracks. And your life too, since your retirement. You have been away so much more in London, at the refuge. It feels good, somehow. The developments with Tony and Ben and Faye, doesn't it? Isn't it amazing? Yes, I think we just have to become more conscious of it. New Year's Eve was great. I saw a side of you which I didn't really know. I know you've always been writing things down, but it did surprise me that you had been working on the same story for the last 10 plus years, and I didn't really have any idea about that. Sometimes I think I know you inside out, and then you surprise me. I think it's one of the things I like best. He laughed and took her in his arms. Little Frida got out of her bed again and waddled over to them, sitting at their feet, as if she wanted to be included in the cuddle. Chris picked her up and they both held her in their arms. They were happy and both felt that sometimes they needed reminding. They heard a car horn toot a few times outside. David and Susan had arrived. David had parked his shiny dark green sports car right outside, and they were just climbing out. Wow! Holly was impressed. She had always coveted a sports car, but it had never been practical. David's car was just what she'd had in mind. It was an old model Triumph, but it looked really well looked after. Yes, I know, Susan smiled while climbing, not the most elegantly, out of the car. It's quite low, though. It takes some getting used to, but it's lovely, isn't it? I saw it, and it was not that expensive. It drives great, but all said and done, with the new modern cars nowadays, this is a bit of an indulgent. It got warm enough, though, didn't it, Sue? Susan actually blushed, although she knew he meant the heating system, which had played up a little initially. Holly looked at her and rolled her eyes, or laughed. We had the music on, and it was surreal how the words of these songs fit our mood. Susan felt so happy to be here with David. He and Chris had already walked off talking, and Holly put her arm around her shoulders. All going well then? She didn't really need to ask, as Susan had happiness written all over her face. He is such a lovely man, and you know, it's nice that I know quite a bit about him already. I seem to know him quite deeply, although in the scheme of things we only spent a summer together back then, as a sort of a couple. I know he feels the same, which makes it all very special. I know you and Chris are such an item. This new love at this time in my life, which is actually an old love, feels so good. I'm so glad that Chris likes him. Yes, he does, and we were talking earlier about how nice it is to see you so happy, and that we need to be a little more conscious of each other. Our own lives have changed so much since Mum died. Do you feel that? Yes, I do. I suppose in many ways we were so used to chat with her about things. In fact, I remember talking to her about David all those years back. She knew I was quite cut up, just leaving, gone, so far away. She said to me that I was very young to find the right man so early in life. Did I even know what I wanted? I remember saying she was one to talk to, as she'd been with Dad for so long. How old was she when they met? I don't really remember. I know she did quite a bit of travelling before they met, but I don't think she was older than in her 20s, late 20s maybe. Anyway, she said that it was quite lucky, and Grandad generally let her get on with things. David was much more headstrong. She did like him, though. She loved it when we played to her. I think you are lucky, dear Susan. He is quite handsome, and what fun that he bought a sports car. We were talking about that a few years back, do you remember? Anyhow, come in. I have to show you our new addition. Holly had for once managed to keep the news of their new little puppy to herself. Opening the door carefully, she could hear David and Chris being welcomed by Frida, who behaved as if they had been away for ages. "Oh my goodness, how sweet is this little one?" Susan watched Frida greeting everyone with a waggy tail and leant down to pick her up, avoiding having her face licked all over. "Who are you, gorgeous creature?" "This is Frida, our cockapoodle mix with something else. New addition to the household. Isn't she just adorable?" "Is this a delayed response to the empty nest syndrome?" Susan was laughing. She put Frida down, who started to bounce around the kitchen. "You know I wanted a dog for ages. This little one was looking for a home. I couldn't resist, and Chris has succumbed to her charms, thank God. You know, she's lovely. We had a dog for 15 years or so. Barnaby," said David. "My girls loved him, and he was so much part of the family. A complete mixed breed he was. He was around for all the time when Margaret was ill. Often he sat with her, and he passed not long after she died. He had become so slow. We all have to get used to animals leaving us. Goodness, I had no intention of bringing the mood down. This little one is for sure lively, and she will keep you busy for years." David had brought some ale, and Chris handed him an opener. Time for a drink and a toast to Frida and again to the new year. Chris was opening the sparkly, and everybody took their drinks into the conservatory. David picked me up at the refuge. Such a lovely place. Susan showed me around, and it's quite a fascinating story. Chris, you spent quite a lot of time there, I hear. Yes, we spruced it up end of last year. It's not quite so busy at the moment, is it, Susan? Many have gone, but we have Anna's mum and dad visiting. We have only had a little time together so far. Her dad is keen to show London to Ludmilla, Anna's mum. They are lovely people, and it has been nice to see Anna so happy. Thankfully, all that business with the police had already happened, and Anna had settled in so well. I expect she will tell them all eventually, but at the moment she enjoys hosting them. We have a couple of new mums with children, but they will hopefully move on soon, as I found a nice flat, if they share. It's so lovely when it works out quickly, isn't it? Chris turned to Susan. He had had not much to do with the homeless or any people in need during most of his life, and the last year at Susan's refuge had given him a new perspective on many things. Yes, for me it feels so like success when life takes shape with one of my residents. Not always like that, though. Did you hear that Sinead apparently went back to her partner? What? Chris was surprised to hear that. Sinead had been quite badly beaten, and so had one of her children. She was not very forthcoming when she arrived months ago, but Chris remembered that her ex-partner sounded horrible and ignorant, always with his fists first, and he was a drunkard. He couldn't imagine how he had managed to persuade Sinead to go back to him. No, I had not heard that. I thought she spent Christmas with her sister. Yes, and he followed her there. One of the boys is his. Anyway, last I heard was that she's back in London living with him, her children too, or at least 3 of them. I cannot fathom it sometimes, but I never really did manage to get her full story. She has been with me on and off for the last 4 years. I know, something I did have to learn quite quickly. People have to want to be helped and help themselves. Fear is so destructive. Most women I have met in your refuge are very capable. I find it often hard to imagine how they lasted so long in the various toxic relationships. Most surely must be harder to stay than just packing a case and leave. Chris still found it hard to empathize with men who beat their partners so badly that sometimes they had to go to hospital. During conversations over breakfast, he had often heard excuses being made, even after things had got so bad that only fleeing was a solution. He remembered his own father very fondly. He was masculine, but he wasn't very macho. Chris remembered he was no good at anything technical. He worked for an insurance company most of his life, and his manliness was never really doubted by Chris. His mum needed little jobs doing, and if She did not do them herself. Somebody was called in. He was quite a tall and strong man. He'd been quite a tall and strong man, but he would have never dreamt of laying a hand on his mother. Chris wasn't naive enough to think this sort of thing did not happen, but despite knowing Susan for over 20 years, he never really considered that side of life until he started helping after his retirement. He really enjoyed it. In fact, it had surprised himself. With Holly now scaling her workload down, I will only come every other week, Susan. I hope that's okay with you. I know we touched on this back around Christmas, but with Holly now working less, we want to find a bit more time for each other. Yes, I know, Chris, and believe it or not, I'm also reducing my workload. Anna really wants to stay, and I think I shall make it all official. She has many talents, most of which are just like skills she learned from her mum, like making delicious rolls, decorating like a professional, and gardening. As it happens, she's also very organized, and this ordeal last year with people trafficking. Susan stopped as everyone was chuckling. Yes, I know, it was not very organized, etc., but let's not forget that there's much of this kind of thing going on all over the world, and ending very rarely like our case. Anyhow, Anna is a real asset, because she loves it in the refuge, and she's so good with everybody, so understanding. Her little accent just adds to her appeal. Susan remembered how Anna had been when she arrived, even though Anna had almost forgotten about it, which was a very good thing, but the implications of the things actually going on had not passed Susan by. She felt fortunate that she could actually consider working less. For Anna, the responsibility she would have would give her a much-needed sense of purpose. Her dad is a hoot. He's very funny in a dry sort of way. He talks about London like it was when he was young in the 60s, and we had some laughs with Anna, explaining that things have changed a lot. But with her having just been here a few months herself, I find myself correcting Anna, who has a very unusual perspective after her ordeal. I find within all that, her dad always has a way of summarizing it, which has us all falling about. You had to be there. Susan smiled at David. It felt so good to be here. Everyone had already settled into the new relationships they were all experiencing. David picked up a guitar which was propped against the wall and started picking chords. Holly picked up the tune immediately and started to sing. If I fell in love. Not long before everybody joined in. Even Chris found himself singing along. Music seemed to always be happening when David was around. They settled down to sing a song, and David was glad he had picked up playing again, much more in the last few years. He had no problem with a medley of Beatles songs. Everybody of their generation would know them. Frida was sleeping in her basket, oblivious of the noise, and Holly hugged herself. Life was so good. Family gathering. Faye and Melanie were sitting in the sunny lounge. Tony and Ben had gone to buy food for their lunch. Susan, David, Holly and Chris were due to come by midday, and they would cook a roast and make lots of vegetables. Everybody had got up early. Faye had felt a little uncomfortable in bed and found Melanie already in the kitchen before 7. It was still dark outside, and they had settled to tea and toast and found themselves talking like old friends. Faye had been telling Melanie of her time in London, meeting Anna at the refuge, and how they had also got on immediately. Melanie had got up very early, as she had been talking to Mio. She had a lot of questions because she could feel the connections, and had been up since 4 a.m. She had felt wide awake and got up to sit to look over the pitch-dark sea, with only one streetlight giving the outside some shape. They were all at Bliss Place. Mio had answered her questions, and she now knew that Lydia was indeed her name, that she had been Russian in her last life as a male, and was here to be one of the new starseeds, helping Gaia in her evolution, raising the vibration with her. Balance had to be restored, and Lydia was impatient to come back. Her meeting Tony was closely connected with her meeting Faye and Ben. She was to be in Lydia's life, and so was Anna. What no one had yet realized was that Anna also had a connection with Alexei. He had been a much older cousin of Ludmila's. But it will be a long time before this will be discovered. For now, Melanie felt already that her being here was beneficial for everyone. She had felt connected to Faye, even before she had confirmation during her morning meditation, but she felt good knowing a little more of the connection, which helped her get a positive trajectory going. When Faye joined her, she had just come out of her contemplating conversation with Mio. She had changed the music and was in the kitchen waiting for the kettle to boil. Faye had had a very vivid dream again, seeing her little girl again by the beach, and remembered the feeling of utter contentment. Telling Melanie all about it was so easy, because she felt that Melanie was much into the things Faye had been studying. Acupuncture and reflexology already opens the mind to a holistic belief system, and Melanie was fascinated to hear that Faye had dreamt of what she had been conversing about with Mio. Faye described the little girl, her knowing eyes, and her feeling when she saw her, remembering greeting her this time and kneeling down to be level with the little person who seemed to know her already. Talking about it with Melanie made it feel so much more real to Faye. They went on to talk about Reiki, and discovered that they had both had the first and second attunement. Both Tony and Ben had had a shower and had gone off, whilst the two women were still sitting and talking. They had left it to the guys to liaise with their respective mothers, and they found themselves looking over the sea, talking like old friends. Tony and Ben had decided to drive to the nearest shopping centre, where they knew they would get all the things Susan and Holly had shouted down the phone. In fact, they soon figured that they were having them on, because their request for truffles, some caviar and champagne, please, were having a gathering of the utmost important, made them realize they had to take everything with a pinch of salt. They had decided they would get a Sunday lunch with pork and beef and vegetables for all tastes, because Melanie was not keen on meat. They were hungry, and they both remembered at the same time that their Umi had always said, "Don't go food shopping when you are hungry," because they kept putting amazing things into the basket only for the other one to take it out again. They had both suddenly felt like boys again. Sometimes Steve had taken both of them shopping when they were young, 13 or so they decided, and had had such a laugh. Steve and Ben so connected at those times. Somehow his dad could always understand Ben's need for adventure. Susan was very involved in the refuge, and Ben had learned early on to look after himself. When he saw his dad, he felt that Steve was more himself when he was with him, more than when he saw him with other people. Even when Ben was little, he remembered that his dad generally did the shopping when his parents were still together, and his dad always took him along. He used to send him off with errands to find things in the shop. Ben would bring back the opposite. So a small bag of sugar would be the biggest bag Ben could find, and because his dad used to go to the same big supermarket every week, Ben got to know the store before he was 4. They had a laugh. He used to get nice things, always contemplating if it was necessary or extremely good fun. Sometimes they would buy flowers for Mum. She would often clean the house or work in the garden, and they would all have pies on their return. Susan did not run the refuge in those days. He could not even remember what she'd been doing. Saturday shopping was with Dad, and he still liked to buy provisions nowadays. It was so very different in China. The small village he lived in mainly worked with markets, stores and street vendors. He had almost forgotten ordinary food shopping in England, and only realized when he was monkeying around with Tony that he had loved those shopping trips with his dad. Tony remembered some of them too. They finally ended up at the till, and both decided they were looking forward to getting together with the oldies, which had them laughing again, because somehow their parents never felt that old to them. They were both keen to meet David. He was 67, which to them seemed quite old, but their Umi had been 95 when she died, and they both remembered her birthday party and the laughs they'd had. By the time they had their stuff scanned, both had tears in their eyes, only to laugh uproariously when the young cashier looked at them questioningly, but they had started to speak in German, and he was none the wiser. Tony said "Alles klar," which had them laughing again like schoolboys. When they arrived at BLISS Place, they could hear voices already. When they opened the downstairs doors, it seemed everybody had arrived. They let themselves in and everyone was still crowded in the hall, introductions all around. Perfect timing, Tony. Ben, come in. Meet David. Holly ushered them in and everybody dispersed into the lounge. Ben looked at his mum and he had rarely seen her that pretty. David was tall and Ben thought really good looking. He didn't look so close to 70. His mum came over and David smiled. Hi, Ben. So lovely to finally meet you. Gosh, you look a lot like your dad. Well, like he did look 30 years ago. Everybody laughed. You must be Tony then. I have been looking forward to meeting you all. Melanie couldn't help staring at everyone. She felt all the connections everybody had, and there was so much love in this room. She knew the whole matter of her knowing Bliss would come up again, and suddenly she felt like disappearing. It was all becoming a little surreal, and she stepped out onto the balcony, where Faye was sitting. They smiled at each other. I love meeting everyone, but I just got to get a little bit of fresh air. Yes, I know. I also feel a little overwhelmed. Isn't David handsome? Faye pulled a chair close to her and patted on it for Melanie to sit down. They smiled at each other. I will have to be talking about my dream of little Lydia. It becomes more and more normal the more I speak it out loud. Melanie sat down. She knew this feeling well. Her emotions about Mio had become very sure. When she was small, she remembered being very sure too, but there were many years in between where all she wanted was to be normal. It felt clear to her that Faye had great gifts as an acupuncturist, as a mother, but also as someone who knows things. The vision of her daughter was accurate, and Melanie suddenly felt a rush of excitement that all of this was going to evolve, and she was part of it. I was thinking along the same lines with Bliss. Oh yes, of course. Did you see her clearly in your dream? How old was she? And how did you know, by the way, that it was Bliss? And who was hiding away on the balcony? Tony stepped out and Melanie closed her mouth. She was just going to come out with it, but stopped herself when she saw Tony. Ben was right behind him and they fetched chairs to join their girls. This is nice. Ben leaned back and stretched his arms. Isn't it getting a bit crowded in there? It is getting a bit crowded in there. They could hear the oldies laughing and the plop of a bottle being opened. Bags were being unpacked and they had all decided that they'd best stay out of the way. Your dad is in good form, Ben looked at Tony. So is your mum. They all laughed as they had all been part of this new development. In fact, everyone seems to be in good form. My mum is working less and writing a lot at the moment, and has adorable Frida. On cue, the little dog came out onto the balcony. Holly and Chris had brought her in a basket after her walk, and she had slept until awakened by the commotion. Having greeted everyone indoors, she had bounced on the balcony the moment her name was uttered. Everybody laughed as the timing was perfect. She loved the attention and everybody was cooing and eyeing as she went to each of them with a waggy tail and tongue licking every hand. Melanie picked her up and she settled immediately into her lap, looking up into Melanie's eyes. Ah, Frida, all you have to do is be, and we love you. They could see the little tail wagging. She looked as if she knew exactly what Melanie was saying, then put her head on her knee and watched everybody's reaction. A dog's eyes are so lovely, aren't they? Faye had always loved animals. They had not had pets at home, but all the animals around their small holding were her friends. It had been a battle every time as the chickens and occasionally a pig was taken to be butchered. They never ate the rabbits, who were soon part of Faye's friendship circle, involved in her stories when she played outside. I had 2 rabbits as friends. I called them Yin and Yang. Everybody laughed and Faye remembered the way she imagined their lives. She fed them every day and her father had built a little house for them out of old pallets. He had soon realized that she would never eat them. Some of their chickens never were either, or the ones with names. We never had a dog, but we had cats, mouse catchers. I love cats too. I grew up with Ming, and she was already old when I became aware of her. She was almost all white and my mum loved her. She followed her everywhere. unless she went away in the car or somewhere else. Then we had Ping, a kitten, and she became mine. It was so sad when she passed away. That must be about 2 years ago. She'd always been there, and even though she was an old lady in cat years, I was always very connected to her. She slept on my bed every night. And then I came, Ben laughed. He had not met Ping. She had died a time before the meeting. Yes, and I'm so glad you did. You helped me more than you will know, getting over Ping's passing. Ping's passing? Holly had stepped out on the balcony to offer them a drink, and had heard the last few words. Everybody laughed hysterically, which made Holly join in without having any idea what was so funny, although the words did sound comical. Faye's cat, Ping. And yes, we would love a drink, Mum, if you're asking. Yes, I was going to. I reckon you were hoping somebody would. Holly smiled at Tony, who looked so happy next to Melanie, who still had Frida on her lap, but she wanted to go down now to see what Holly was doing. Shall we come in? Ben had not spoken yet much with David, and he didn't want to seem as if he avoided it. No, you're all right. We just put the oven on, and we'll get on with putting the meat in and get the veggies prepared. Come in when you like. What would you like to drink? Susan had started to peel potatoes, and both David and Chris were busy cutting carrots and sorting the dining table. The meat was already in the oven, and it was fun the way they carried on their conversations while preparing the lunch. They could see the others on the balcony, and Susan felt a wave of happiness wash over her when she saw Ben holding Faye's hand, and her sister with Tony and Melanie, who was also a lovely girl. Woman, she corrected herself. She seemed very insightful, and she felt Tony was in love, and looking at Melanie, who was looking at her nephew, she could see that she was too. There's a lot of love here today, she thought, and in her mind's eye she imagined her mother clapping, as she would have adored this gathering. Her eyes wandered to the chair her mother used to occupy. Frida had made herself comfortable on it, and she smiled. Her mum always wanted a dog, but had been too busy. Chris had just switched the radio on, and she almost laughed out loud when she heard the old song, I Love to Love. She could hear David joining in, and before long they found themselves bopping about, and she felt happier than she had for a long time. Right, I'll stop here now. I'm wishing you all a good Sunday. The downside on reading it aloud is when you notice that you've made a mistake or left something out, it's too late to put it in. I guess that's why people do books first. But I do the audio. Bye-bye.